Hey everyone, welcome. This is the third annual Virtual Connect. The Virtual Connect is an opportunity for the Samvera community to gather online and touch base on the various ongoing efforts in the community. Today we have 3 featured presentations by Lynette, Esmé, and Tom Johnson, and this would be followed by lightning talks and interest and working group updates. We'll take a 20-minute break around 12:40 and reconvene at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Each featured presentation is 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes for question and answers. You can put your questions in the chat, and I will be reading the questions for the presenters. The question and answers for the lightning talks will be after all lightning talks, and we will follow the same process of putting the questions in the chat. You can see the link. Actually, on the last slide, there was a link for all the program and also the Slack channel. If you have not yet joined the Slack channel, please do so. Virtual Connect 2018. Just a reminder, all Samvera Virtual Connect and all Samvera events follow the Code of Conduct and Anti-Harassment Policy document as documented on the wiki page. This event would not have been possible to organize without the amazing program committee we have this year. Thank you, everyone. I would just take everybody's name. It is very important. We all really work together to make this event happen today. Thanks to Karen, John, Franny, Rebecca, Ellen, Chrissy, and Jane for your amazing contribution and organizing this event. Special thanks to Chrissy for hosting the Zoom and staying on top of all the practice sessions and making sure all the technology is working. In case you need assistance with any technology questions or any other concerns, please post a message in chat or Slack, and a member of program committee will assist you. And hope to see you all at the Connect 2018 in October at the University of Utah. Few of the important dates we have for the Connect is coming up July 13th for the workshop proposals, July 30th for the presentation proposals, and early bird registration ends on August 15th. All the details are listed on the link here. Okay, and now we move on to the featured presentations. The first presentation is by Lynette. The topic is, it is the demo of the new collection features in Hyrax, and I will let Lynette share her screen.
Right, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
I just wanted to start off by commenting on sort of the process that we used for adding the collection extensions. We had a couple of working groups. We had one that was focused on what features would be included, and then we had one that was focused on the UI changes that would occur. And as we were working through the features that we wanted to include, one of the things that came up in the group was that not everybody wanted every feature that we were making, that we were looking at making available. And so one of the first things that we came up with to address that is the addition of a concept called collection types. So you can get to the collection types under the dashboard menu, under settings, collection types. And so what the types allow us to do is to configure different types of collections to have or not have some of the new features that we have available. There are 2 basic types of collections that have existed in Hyrax for quite some time, and that is admin sets and user collections. So you will see that there are no delete buttons for those two particular collection types, and that is because it's maintaining backward compatibility. And they are defined and configured in a way that has them behave the same way that they did in earlier versions of Hyrax. And so we'll just go ahead and look at one so you can see what kinds of configurations we have. So there's some basic metadata. You'll actually see this when you go to create a collection of a certain type. You'll see the description listed so you know which type you actually want to select. And the settings give you a hint at what types of new features are available. So we have nesting, branding, discovery, sharing, and also multiple membership. And there's 3 at the bottom that are only available for admin sets. And this is to allow the admin set functionality that we've had previously. And that's require membership. So all admin sets require membership. And you can assign a workflow that when a work goes into a particular admin set, it will get that workflow. And you can set up visibility restrictions and limitations and define how the visibility is going to be handled for any works that get created in that particular workflow. So you can see that the only things that are allowed for admin sets are the sharing, the require membership, the workflow, and visibility. So let's also look real quick at user collections. So the settings for those pretty much allow you to do all the additional functionality. The only thing that you couldn't do in previous versions that you can do now is the nesting and the branding. You could have multiple membership, and multiple membership means any work of a particular, that's going into a particular collection type. If it's not turned on, then it can only go into a single collection of that type. It could still belong to different types, so you could have it in an organizational collection and then have it show up in an exhibit. But if you limit organizations to only have single membership, you wouldn't be able to put it in multiple organizational collections. Sharing existed previously, but it wasn't as extensive. Oh, should I turn that off? Sorry, we had. I had somebody join in the room, and they set up recording. So it's turned off now, though. Sorry about that. Sharing is more extensive. It used to be, could you edit or view the collection? And now you have the option to also apply that sharing to new works. So if you have a manager defined for the collection, when a work is created directly in that collection, it will also apply to the works that are created in that collection. And the same thing for viewers. If you create a work in a collection that has viewers, then those viewers will also be able to view the works that are created. And this is similar to admin sets in the way that they've worked previously. So this particular characteristic has been applied now more broadly to collections. But you can see that this is optional, the ability to apply it to new works, because some sites may not want that feature. They may want them to continue to work the way they did previously. I'm sort of going up the list. The discovery is the other piece. So you could do discovery before you could have a collection show up, but you may not want your collections to show up in the discovery interface. So when a user searches for something, does it show up in the search results, the collection itself? And this allows you to say collections of a particular type, they are not allowed to be discoverable. If you set it to discovery, all that means is that now you have the option to set public, private, or institutional. It doesn't mean that it's definitely going to be discoverable. So if you set it to private, it still won't show up in search results. Excuse me. The branding allows you to say that a particular collection type can have branding. And by that, we allow addition of a banner that goes across the top, and also some logos that you can put that will overlay on the banner itself. And I'll demonstrate some of these things a little more when we look at a specific collection. Nesting is allowing us, and this is a fairly extensive addition, the nesting is, it allows you to have collections nested within collections, which was something that PCDM had as a vision right from the very start, but we have not had it in Hyrax until this 2.1.0 release. All right, so just to look at collection types one more time, I'm just going to mention, I'm not going to show the configurations here, although I will show one configuration. So I have two other collection types that I put in, and these are purely for the demonstration. You can define any types of collections that make sense for your particular repository. You could have just the two basic default ones, or you could have 5 or 6 different collection types. We sort of envision that collection types wouldn't be real extensive, so it wouldn't be like there would be 20 collection types. But I suppose if you wanted to create 20, you could. It would totally depend on the designs that you want to set up. I think 4 or 5 is a much more typical number of collection types. So the one thing I didn't talk about is participants. So we have added participants to the collection types that allow you to specify who can manage a collection type and who can create collections of a particular type. So you may, for example, if you have exhibits, you may want to limit your exhibits excuse me, to just your library staff. But your user collections, you might want all registered users to be able to create. So this just allows you a little more control. The impact, when you set managers, they become managers of any collection that gets created of that type. When you set creators, it just means they can create a collection and they only have permissions to the collections they actually create. And just a real quick, we also added in a badge color, so you can set the badge color to be different colors. I think I did not do that in this demo, but you'll see in a minute. We'll look at collections and you'll see where that might be useful. So I'm currently logged in as an admin, which is why I see all the additional stuff on the left-hand side. When you come to the collections page in the dashboard, you're going to see only the collections you've created, whether you're an admin user or not, but you also have the All Collections tab, which allows the admins to see every collection in the repository. So you can see I went from 3 to now I have quite a few collections. So here you can see I do have one collection that has a different color badge, but the exhibits and the organizations, I did not change that color, so they have the same color. And one of the things that was an addition with the 2.1.0 release is we put a little more information in this table so you can see better what's the state of a particular collection. So you can see whether it's public or private. You can see how many items are in the collection. And you can see when it was last modified, as well as some quick actions that you can take from here. I'm going to edit one of the collections so you can see, actually not that one though. Let me go back. We'll do butterflies across the globe. It doesn't have very much information in it yet, and we're going to come in to see what the edit looks like. So if I had just created a new collection, it would not show me these additional tabs. They only show up once you've created it. And so I have the same basic descriptive metadata that you have had previously, but now I have a couple of additional tabs. So we'll look at how you can set up some branding. So I can just go through and select my banner, and if I have logos, I don't actually have a good logo, so you're going to see a logo for another project, and it's unfortunately not going to look as good because I didn't have the time to design this in a good way. So I'm going to go ahead and save my changes, and then I'm going to show you. So the admin view of the collection looks basically the same as it did before, but I now have excuse me, a public view of the collection. And you can see that the branding information is now at the top. We have the banner, and then we have my logo that unfortunately doesn't show up well. And so the reason for having the two views is there are certain needs you need to do with lots of buttons, allowing you to edit and do all sorts of other things to the collection when you're administering it. But you might want to know, what is this going to look like to the end user when I'm done? And so this particular view allows you to see, this is what the public user is going to see when they come and look at this collection. So speaking of additional buttons, I'll go ahead and orient to the show page a little bit. Up at the top, we have basic editing and deleting buttons that you can use to affect the collection as a whole. And then we also have some deposit type buttons. Now, this particular collection isn't nestable, so the only kinds of depositing you can do is adding new works. So you can add a new work through this collection, or you can select an existing work. And I'm going to show you how you add an existing work. In this case, I don't have any works I created myself, so as the admin, I can still go to the All Works tab. Now, in previous releases, when you as an admin looked at All Works, you didn't have the buttons on the side, so you wouldn't be able to add additional resources. So I'm just going to go ahead and select, even though it's not related to the butterflies, I'm going to go ahead and select it, and it should have told me, it's not going to let me do it because I don't own that collection. I'm sorry, but I created my data with seed data today, and so it's not letting me do everything that I normally can do. If I come back and select one that I own instead of one that I manage, it should let me do it to the one that I manage as well, especially as an admin. But in this particular case, it's the seed data process. I just didn't do it quite correctly. So when I do add to collection, oh, it's still not letting me. Okay, sorry about that. The seed data is messed up, and so I'm not going to be able to show you quite everything that I would like to show. So it should normally, it would have automatically put up the collection that I'm adding to because I'm coming from the collection, and so then you would just have to say okay, and it would automatically put it in the collection that you started from. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show was nesting, and we're gonna, so my top level of my nesting is the my example university, and you can see that I have many of the abilities that I had before. I now have this additional add to collection, and I also have this section about sub collections, and you can see I have 2 schools underneath that. And if I go to the School of Education, I can navigate down. And here I can see now that I have a parent, my example university. I could remove that, this collection from being inside it. It doesn't delete example university, and it doesn't delete School of Education. It just removes that relationship between the two. And then I can continue to navigate down through Higher Education Department. And I get down to the bottom, and I can see I have some works in the higher education. I don't currently have any sub-collections here, and I still have my parent collections, which I can navigate back up. And you can see that I have remove buttons here as well, where I could remove sub-collections from this particular collection. So I can create a new collection as a sub-collection. And so the additional tabs, you'll notice originally the tabs weren't there, and now the tabs are there. Because the organizations are discoverable, you can see I have the choice of making this public, in which case it'll be discoverable, or keeping it private, in which case it cannot show up in search results. And I also have the ability to do additional sharing that's at the collection level. So we saw the collection type sharing. This is similar, but this is looking more now like what you may have seen in the past with admin sets. So there's managers, depositors, and viewers. If I set someone up as a manager and the collection type is configured to apply to new works, this user will be able, all managers are able to manage this particular collection. If they're also able to apply it to works, then they'll be able to manage any works that are created in this collection. And for depositors, this means that any users who are depositors can deposit works and set up nested collections within this particular collection. And viewers will be able to look at the collection, but they won't have any kind of editing or deposit rights for this collection. And if it's set up to cascade down to works, they'll be able to be readers of the works as well created in this collection. So I want to make a quick comment, and this applies to admin sets in the past as well as collections now. When you go to set managers and depositors and viewers, the basic recommendation for most organizations is that you would want to add groups and not individual users. And the reason for that is if I right now add a group, the library staff, as a group, and I say library staff can be depositors, if one of my users leaves being a library staff and they're no longer able to be depositors, if you apply it as a user, then every work that was created in the collection will have that user's ID associated with the work. If you do it as a group, then the group is associated with the work, and the only thing you have to do at that point is take the user out of the group instead of having to take the user out of every single work that's been created. So from a management perspective, long-term of your repository, it's much easier to use groups than individual users. I like to point that out because I think sometimes it's not intuitive for folks that the creation of the roles in the works only happens when the work is created. So if I come back later and change who's the managers and who's the depositors, that does not cascade out to works that were already created. And so I just wanted to sort of highlight that. Okay, so I'm going to show one more thing as an admin that's on this particular. I'm coming to the all collections only because I want there to be multiple types of collections, because I want to show the collection type filter. You can see that there are 3 types of collections right now. I haven't created any kind of user collection or anything. And if I want to only look at my exhibits, I can select the exhibit filter, and then I just see the exhibit types. And so that's really useful if you have a lot of collections and you work across a lot of collection types. You still have the visibility filter that I believe was in there before 2.10, but I'm not completely sure. If it wasn't, it's a new addition so that you can also filter by visibility. All right, and so I'm going to switch over to another screen. This is a regular user. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have hardly any menus over there now because this user doesn't have the administrative privileges. So I've come straight to the collection screen, and this user has created one collection, the chemistry department. But previously, the creator of some other collections have given special privileges to that user. And by special privileges, I mean the collections have been shared with the user either as the user being a manager, a depositor, or a viewer. So what you won't see in this screen is if you have view access only because everybody has view access, like it's a public collection, or the group that was set for the viewers is all registered users, then it won't show up in this list, because this list is supposed to be helping you to focus in on some of the collections that you helped manage and in a special way. So if it's open to all users, that's not really special access. So we sort of filter those out to make this more useful. Otherwise, this list can be absolutely huge. So this allows the user to come into the example university, and in this case, the user is a viewer of this example university, so you can see they don't really have any special buttons. They don't have the edit and delete, and they don't have the ability to add any sub-collections or works. And so this happens to be public, but even if this was private, the user would still be able to look at the example university as a viewer. And the way people use that would be if you have someone who's helping to provide feedback, you can allow them to look at a private collection even before it's available to the public to take a look at that. All right, so I think I've actually covered the majority of what I want to cover. I will show going through creating a new collection. So let's actually not do it on this user because I want to show. So if you notice when I click new collection there is a whole ton of collections that user can create. If I create a new collection here, the list isn't much smaller. The one thing that was taken off is the admin sets. So this user's not an admin, so they can't create admin sets. If the list was even smaller, if I hadn't had exhibits set up such that this user could create exhibits, you wouldn't see that either. And if this was like a really bare bones user who really has no privileges and the only thing they can do is create user collections, we wouldn't even come to this select type. They would have immediately gone to the edit screen. So they wouldn't have to select one if they can only create a single type. And all right, so actually I've already talked about all of these, so I'm not going to show another one of those. I'm just going to show you one more thing because I do have time. Oh, I know, actually one more thing I do want to show to be sure that I show. If you want more information on the new functionality for collections, this is, if you haven't seen this yet, this is a site that's definitely worth going to explore. This is the documentation effort for Hyrax and the Samvera community in general. There's quite a bit of information in here about Hyrax because we just happen to have a lot of documentation about Hyrax when we started this process of creating the documentation site. But specifically for this particular talk, I wanted to point you to collections and admin sets. There's a general overview that talks about it, but the one that has probably changed the most would be the collection types. And so there are examples of various kinds of collection types and also a discussion of some of the features that I've demonstrated here. The other one that I would really point you to is the collection type participants and collection sharing in general. So if you want to know how the various participants that you assign the sharing permissions to, how do they combine if you've got some set up in admin sets and some set up in collections, this has many more details about how all of that works. And then you can see there's also some facts here for some of the other features. And I also want to put in a little plug for workshop planning for the architecting repository infrastructure with collection types, admin sets, and collections. This is going to be a workshop at Samvera Connect. And I have put in some use cases of how people might want to use collection types and admin sets. And as part of that workshop, we'll go through and explore how would you set these things up and actually see some hopefully really live examples. So if you have a use case and you're interested in this workshop, I encourage you to go and add your use cases to that. Feel free to add anything you want. I'll sort of curate it and maybe clean it up and consolidate as we get closer to the workshop. And with that, I open the floor to questions.
Thanks, Lynette. We have about 4 questions, and we'll start with the first question by Nathan Tallman. The question is, what's the difference between discovery and visibility?
So the only difference is discoverability and visibility are actually the same. So when I say something is discoverable, I only mean that you have the ability to mark it as public, in which case it becomes discoverable. If you say a collection type is not discoverable, then all the collections of that type will be marked private, and the user will not have the option to set it to public. So the way something becomes discoverable is when you actually mark it public.
Okay, sounds good. The next one is when visibility on an instance of a custom collection, what does institution imply? And I think Julie already answered that question in the chat.
Yeah, it's the same. It has the same meaning as it does for works.
Okay. So the next one is by Daniel Sanford. How does this feature to sort out view permissions on collections distinguish between collections that have limited view access and collections with broad view access? Or to be more clear, how does it decide which ones to skip showing exactly?
I'm not completely sure I follow that particular question. I'm going to...
Let's do the first part of the question. How does this feature to sort out view permissions on collections distinguish between collections that have limited view access and collections with broad view access?
So I can interpret this question, I think, two ways. One would be the sharing aspect of collections, and the other would be visibility. So visibility, I'll take visibility first just because it's really straightforward. So visibility has the three settings of public, institution, and private. And that's going to only affect whether or not something shows up in search results. And the visibility from collections does not get applied down to works in the same way that some of the visibility stuff in admin sets applies down to works. The other is sharing. So if you share a collection with someone as a viewer, then the user will be able to look at that collection inside the Hyrax application in the sort of admin view of the collection, even if that collection is private. And then also that viewer ability gets applied down to any works that get created directly in the collection. So I keep using the term directly in the collection, which means that if you created a work and you tried to put it in 3 collections at the same time, then the software doesn't know which collection you would consider to be primary, and so it doesn't use any of the collection permissions. But if you create a new work and you're adding it to a single collection at the time the work is created, then it will apply the permissions from the admin set as they're defined, because every work has to be in an admin set, and it will append any of the collection permissions.
Okay, so he did, Daniel did just put a clarification question that he said, you mentioned that some collections are not shown in a user's list of collections because everyone can see them. How does it decide what those collections are?
Okay, so that would be over here when you're in collections. Okay, and the question is how does it decide what to put in managed collections and not in managed collections? So first there's what can you see as a user? And so there's all the collections that you can see as a user. And then it discards anything that the only way you got access to it is because it was public collection or because you're a member of the registered group of users. If that's the only way that you got access to it, it eliminates it. So if you are given manage access, deposit access, or viewer access through the sharing tab when you edit the collection, then it will show up on this list.
Okay, sounds good, thanks. The next question is by Janice. Question about collection types. When I start up my vanilla Hyrax application, I don't initially see the default admin sets and user collections in the configuration settings collection type section of the dashboard. And then she's saying, after a few clicks as an admin, the admin set sometimes appears, and then the same goes for the user collections. Is this something that we initially need to do before those two appear in the collections type section of the admin dashboard?
There is. So I will show you the instructions for that. This is in the README on Hyrax. Actually, probably the better place to look is in the releases. So in the release documentation, one of the things that it says you will need to do is to run this line right here to create the default collection types. So this is in addition to what you normally do to create the default admin set, and those instructions are over in the regular README. And I'm sure this instruction is in the regular README too. I just know for sure it's here in the releases. So in the release notes, it tells you what you need to run to get those set up.
Okay. Sounds
if
good.
you're creating, I guess I should note that if you're creating a brand new one, you don't have to do that. The script, when you create a new one, sorry, you have to. This script, when you run this template, it has in it the instructions that will create, it will run the command that I was just showing you a minute ago to automatically create those collection types. So if you're creating a new Hyrax app, you just need to use this template. If you're migrating, then you need to actually run the command yourself. And it's in the release notes.
Okay, sounds good, thanks. Two more questions from Kevin. One is, can you paste the link for the workshop planning page, maybe on the chat or the Slack after this presentation, if you can do that. The other question is, would having many collections cause any problems, as in at least 350,000?
I haven't tested with 350,000, but I will tell you that in the process of creating the 210 collection extensions, one of the things that we did was we did a reverse relationship on the nesting. So if you're not nesting, I don't think you're going to run into any more issues than you would anytime you have something at that scale. But if you're nesting and you have many members, we reverse the relationship such that the member knows about the parent collection instead of the other way around. And that's similar to some of the work that was done for putting works into collections where there was a known problem with the ordering if you had too many works in a collection. So we wanted to avoid having that same problem with nesting.
Okay. And I think we are almost on time. Maybe we can take one last question. Question by Catherine. I have a question about works being cross-listed in collections. Would that affect duplication and external harvesting, such as in OPAC?
So I don't know that I can directly address whether or not that's going to be an issue for your specific example, but if it is, you can turn off multiple collections. So if you need to not allow collections to be in multiple collections, you can turn this off. Although this only applies to collections of a particular type. So you might have to do some customization if you need to turn it off across all collections, all collection types.
Okay. Okay, I guess we have one more minute. Oh, we don't have any more time, sorry. So the other questions, if you can post it in, if you can answer those questions in the Slack channel, Lynette, that would be helpful.
Do you prefer Slack or chat?
I think Slack would be good because chat is for the next presentation, So it would be helpful to do it in the Slack channel, maybe later after all the presentations, if you can answer those questions.
I sure will.
Okay, thanks, Lynette.
Thank you.
Really helpful, thank you. Okay, the next presentation is on Valkyrie by Esmé. And here you go, Esmé.
Hi, I'm Esmé Cowles, and I'm here to talk about Valkyrie. I'm repeating a presentation that I gave at Open Repositories last month, talking a little bit about how Valkyrie can let us reimagine the Samvera community. I want to start with just a quick overview of what Valkyrie is to make sure we're all on the same page, and then spend most of the time talking about, I think, the lessons and implications. So Valkyrie is a new persistence layer for Samvera. It's the part of the repository stack that does core operations like storing metadata and files. It provides APIs for processing objects, accessing them, navigating relationships between objects, and it most directly corresponds to Active Fedora. The big feature of Valkyrie is that it provides swappable backends. So Active Fedora, as the name suggests, stores data in Fedora and Solr, and it does so in a way that's sort of interlinked in a way that I'll talk about in a minute. Valkyrie supports both of those, and it also supports Postgres as sort of a third big option for storing metadata. There are a number of other backends that have been developed that are sort of in various stages of development and testing, and those include storing metadata in a Redis object store, in any active record database, not just Postgres, and some cloud options like Amazon DynamoDB and Cloud Search. And so Valkyrie lets you choose which of these works best for your application and switch back and forth between them without having to rewrite your application. The main way it does this is by providing a set of APIs, abstractions for working with files and metadata. It defines a small set of queries for loading and navigating between objects. And these are not end-user queries. These are queries like, I have an identifier, give me the object that corresponds to it. Or I have a collection identifier, tell me the identifiers of the objects that are members of this collection, things like that. And crucially, it provides a shared test suite so that we can run that test suite against all of the backends that are in the core code to make sure that they keep working the way we expect them to work. And when you want to develop a new backend, you can run that test suite against your backend to make sure that it works the way Valkyrie applications would expect. So just a few words on why we developed Valkyrie. It started initially with a feeling that there were some real divergent use cases, that institutional repositories and digital collection applications were sort of different beasts with different needs. Over time, we came to see that as a bit of a false dichotomy, and came to see some other things as more important, like whether you wanted to configure your application by going to an administrative panel like we just saw with the collections extension work, or whether you wanted to write some code to change how the application worked. Whether you had simple or complex metadata, and especially whether you had a lot of links between objects, either whether those are control vocabulary or PCDM, membership or ordering type of links. Working on some of those and trying to scale our repository up led us to some performance problems. When we tried to ingest large objects, we found that each page in an object was slower than the one before it, and as our objects grew in size, they got unreasonably slow and started to fail and time out. Once we got some large objects ingested, we had performance problems editing them. And many of these really went back to the many members problem with Fedora. We worked on that problem in a variety of different ways. We reversed collection membership in order to get rid of some of those problems, but they were really a deal breaker for us, not just because of the performance problems, but because while we were working on those problems, we were constantly butting up against the complexity of the stack. Fedora and Solr, like I mentioned before, are both stored data in by Active Fedora. And when you look at an architecture diagram, they're sort of in separate corners of the diagram and they fulfill different needs. But when you're looking at the code, their usage is deeply intertwined. Because Fedora doesn't have a query API, and because Solar is faster, in many ways, they had both been used in a lot of different ways. And so both the core code and the applications sort of have calls to Solar sprinkled around. And not just calls to Solar, but lots of details about field names in Solar and query syntax of Solar and Boolean logic, sort of a lot of the implementation details of exactly what Solar is like. And this is sort of points back to the lack of centrally defined, clear APIs. And so that complexity was a real impediment to us being able to do what we wanted to do to work on the performance. So we decided to implement Valkyrie. At Princeton, we decided to use Postgres as our backend and build our repository on top of that. So now I want to shift gears and talk about some things I think we've learned and some takeaways we can get from this. And I just start out by saying that, of course, we're a big community. This picture is a couple years old, and we're bigger now than we were then. So I'm sure a lot of people will have a lot of different reactions and different thoughts, and for some people, this will be pretty irrelevant. But I definitely think there's some important things for me. The biggest one for me is that the Samvera working group process worked well for Valkyrie. You know, Trey Pendragon wrote a prototype. He promoted it at community events as a breakable toy that people could, you know, download, set up, play with, give feedback on. And that led to sort of following the long established process for forming a working group. That working group had members from 5 different institutions. They organized some community sprints. There were ultimately code contributions from 11 different institutions, culminating in the release of Valkyrie 1.0 earlier this year. And so as we think about Samvera governance, which we've been talking about quite a lot recently, I think it's important to say that some parts of the community are already working really well, and to be careful not to break those or discard those just because they're old. That some of those things are working quite well, and we should keep them where they work. Another lesson I think we can learn is that Fedora doesn't have to be the center of the universe. I say this as somebody who's worked on Fedora quite a lot over the last several years. Fedora serves some use cases very well, but it's not the best choice for everyone. It doesn't work for all kinds of data. It does have its flaws and its limitations where it doesn't work well. And I think it's also important to think about the evolution going on in Fedora right now. There are alternate implementations and work on an API to sort of standardize those and allow experimentation and different backends within the Fedora framework. And when we started working on Valkyrie in earnest, we looked at those very closely, and we thought about whether we could use any of those alternate implementations. And the answer for us was no. There weren't any implementations out there that met our performance and scaling needs, that also had the sort of community support that we needed to be able to trust them with our data. And so there's been some work on the API over the last year. There's been work on the implementations and a test suite. And so work there is ongoing. But still today, I don't think that there is another Fedora implementation that you could reasonably say this has the kind of community support that people could trust their data with it. So regardless of whether we're talking about Valkyrie backends or whether we're talking about backends in the sense of alternate Fedora implementations, either way, I think having multiple options really opens up possibilities. You get to pick between the different options based on how well they perform, which features they have, or other priorities. You know, maybe your IT shop really likes MySQL and wants to put their data in that, or maybe maybe you have a strong inclination to use a particular platform because you have a lot of expertise in it, or you're using it for other projects. Having these other backends gives you a lot of flexibility to pick things that work for you. And as we have multiple backends, I think it's important to stop and reflect on what that means for Samvera. Fedora has been the defining aspect of the community for a long time. And if we have multiple options, how do we think of Samvera? If it's not a front end for Fedora, but if it's its own thing and with relationships to multiple other backends, I think that lets us think about Samvera in a different way, think about how we build our software and how it works together. In the same way that renaming the community from Hydra to Samvera gave us time to stop and think about who we are and what we value, I think we can take the same opportunity here, and I hope we will. And one of the key things I hope that we will think more about is stewardship, both of code and of data. As we develop Valkyrie applications and as we work to use Valkyrie in Hyrax, there's a lot of code to update. There's a lot of core code. There's a lot of code in people's deployed applications that will need to be updated to take advantage of Valkyrie. And in those repositories that are running right now, there's a lot of deployed data. And we haven't always done a good job of providing upgrade paths and migration tooling and minimizing migrations of data. And I hope we will do better in the future as we think about what it means to have a sustainable ecosystem and provide upgrade paths for people. A lesson I hope we can learn from Islandora is that you shouldn't fight against your platform. You know, in the way that Islandora Claw is really an attempt to rethink Drupal and rethink Islandora and embrace the Drupal platform, I hope that Valkyrie will be an opportunity to rethink our interaction with the Rails ecosystem, which is large and vibrant and has lots of existing code that we can draw from. Active Fedora looks a lot like Active Record, but it's not exactly Active Record, and so some things that work with Active Record won't work with Active Fedora. So I hope that as Valkyrie implements the data mapper pattern and uses sort of community gems for doing that, we'll be in a better position to use more community gems at a more fundamental level and help us just embrace that ecosystem more fully. And just one thing I'd call out about that is developers. There are a lot more Rails developers in the world than there are Samvera developers. And so using tools that people already know and using them the way that other people use them helps us recruit developers who can get up to speed quickly. When we bring developers into the community, it helps us make them productive and happy instead of frustrating them by thwarting their expectations and having sort of weird rules and procedures based on, you know, one particular backend's limits. And the last lesson I'd like to talk about is allowing things to be built with components instead of having everything be a product. There's a lot of gravity around Hyrax, and I think that's very understandable. You see some of the work that's gone into Hyrax, and it's very good work. It has a lot of features and functionality, and I really understand wanting to use that platform. But I also think it's important for the health of the community that building with components is a viable strategy. If we want to embrace the community, if we want to take advantage of the Rails ecosystem, then building everything into one big project is an impediment to that. It makes it easy for us to not notice when things only work with our code and don't work with anything else. And I don't think a one-size-fits-all is ever going to be a good strategy for this community. This community is really often focused on people who want to do something a little bit special and a little bit different. And I think we should support that and allowing people to build their own custom applications and really supporting that and having that be a vibrant thing that people can do without being on the fringes of the community, I think is really important for the long-term health and stability of our software. And like I've said, really helps us take advantage of the ecosystem instead of just building one application that handles most things well. Thank you. Thanks for listening. I'll just leave you with some resources on Valkyrie. If you want to talk to me, I'm happy to take questions now, and I'm always happy to hear questions on on Twitter or GitHub or Slack. If you want these slides, the link is down there in the bottom corner.
Okay. Thank you, Esmé. That was really informative. We have one question so far. Actually, I think two questions. The first one is by Daniel. What work in Valkyrie is highlighted as the relative benefits of Fedora and Postgres for use in Samvera?
I'm not sure I understand what highlights the relative benefits. I would say that the big benefit for Postgres over Fedora is that it provides, a standard SQL query API. And so in the Postgres implementation, it's easy to do queries for relationships and to find data by type or by property values. Whereas when you use Fedora that doesn't have a query API, you have to compensate for that somehow. The traditional approach to compensating for that is to index everything in Solr and use that query API. There are alternatives, such as iterating over all of the objects in Fedora and querying them as you have them in memory, or some other way of establishing links that you can follow. But those don't perform as well or scale as well. And so that, I think, is really the biggest benefit. The other one I would say is just raw performance, that the Postgres database scales very well for just basic read-write, pushing data in and out.
Okay, sounds good. Next question by Jonathan. I understand that Valkyrie was in part motivated by performance problems in some scenarios with the previous Fedora-backed stack. Does Valkyrie alleviate those performance problems? If you are still using Fedora with Valkyrie, or it is the benefit for those scenarios instead, in using something other than Fedora as backend?
I think it's mostly the latter. I think it's mostly that right now you can solve performance problems by using a different backend. Valkyrie doesn't sort of automatically fix or compensate for Fedora's performance problems. I will say that over time, as alternate Fedora implementations are developed that don't have those performance problems, have different performance characteristics, Valkyrie will let you switch between those more easily. And so I think even if you want to keep using Fedora, it provides you a path to working with other Fedora implementations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One more question. Can you talk more about how Valkyrie embraces the Rails ecosystem in its choice not to depend on active record as persistence? It's not clear to me how it embraces the Rails ecosystem more than the previous stack, but maybe it does in other non-AR ways.
Yes, Valkyrie is also not active record, which is the most common pattern in the Rails world. And so I would say the most compatible thing you could do would be to not use Valkyrie or Active Fedora and just use active record. But that would really, I think, be hard to reconcile with the other things that we've done in Samvera. And so we decided not to do that wasn't a profitable strategy. Using Data Mapper seems like a good middle ground to us for using a bunch of gems that are more integrated into mainstream Rails development. We use the dry struct and the dry types gems that are sort of one of the common implementations of the data mapper pattern. And Valkyrie really uses and encourages a bunch of other reuse of existing community gems, like using the Draper library for doing decorator patterns and a bunch of other things like that, that sort of try harder to use standard community components instead of inventing our own solutions to everything.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next question is from Mark Bussey. I like the idea of building from components. Esmé, you kind of made it sound like this might be at odds with providing bundled solutions. But do you think there might be a way that we could build bundled solutions that leverages better defined components instead of fighting against that idea?
Yeah, I would say I think that building from components versus building solutions are in tension. I don't think they have to necessarily be in conflict all the time. I think that building a solution to the detriment of being able to build from components, I think if nobody's actually building from components, that the ability to do that withers and suffers bugs and regressions that you won't notice because nobody's there to test it. So I think doing both is really healthy. I think that having some people building from components and having other people collaborating on bigger bundled solutions, I think those are both good strategies and they work for different people and different use cases. And so I definitely do think that doing both of those is good and healthy for the community.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. It seems like we don't have any more questions. We'll just give it a minute if anyone else has any question. Okay. Okay, I guess I missed one question from Daniel. Let me go back and see. Okay, now we covered those. So the next question is by Andrew. Is it the plan of Valkyrie to handle some sophisticated queries? More specifically, will the Valkyrie query interface be used in lieu of Solr?
It's not the plan of Valkyrie to completely replace Solr. I think if you're using Blacklight, we still expect you to index things in Solr and have Blacklight talk to Solr. So it's never the intention of Valkyrie to be sort of a complete replacement for any other kind of query API. But it is the plan that if you don't want Solr, if you don't need Solr, then you don't have to use it. And if you want to use Postgres or if you want to use Fedora or something else, you're not dependent upon keeping things in sync in Solr if you don't otherwise want to. So there is the ability to add custom queries. That's something that we've done for a while in Princeton's implementation, Figgy. We've identified a handful of things that we want to do for convenience sake, and we've implemented some custom queries to handle those. And over time, I think we will see what other people need and what other people want to do to see if those belong in the core query repertoire. So far, we've been sort of hesitant to move a bunch of those things into the core repertoire because each query that you add, sort of raises the bar for implementation by other backends. And so we haven't been actively working to increase that set of queries. I think it's 6 or 7 right now queries that are in the core test suite. But over time, if everybody starts using the same custom queries, I think we would move to include those and expand the query, sort of the default query functionality.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure if you already answered this question from Daniel. There were 2 questions from him, and I'll just read the question and you can let me know if you already answered this question. The question is, with the work done in Valkyrie, what have you found to be the benefits of Postgres backend? You mentioned scaling and queries already, and what benefits does Fedora have that Postgres does not?
Oh, I answered the first one, but not the second one. I would say the benefits of Fedora are Fedora's special features. Things like fixity checking, things like the linked data platform, things like the Fedora event API. There's sort of a rich set of repository-oriented functionality in Fedora that Postgres doesn't give you. Postgres is just a simple data store, and it's not going to do those other things. And so if those other features are important to you, I think you would need to either implement them yourself if you wanted to use a different backend, which would be a burden.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Next question from Rick Johnson. If others are looking to migrate to using Valkyrie, has there been any work on migrating data from one backend to another?
There has been some work. In general, when you have data in one Valkyrie backend, it's very easy to iterate over it and copy it to another backend. So reindexing Solr, for example, if you have your data in Fedora and Solr, you can just iterate over the Fedora backend and sync objects to the Solr backend, and so that's very easy. So far, there isn't a backend that supports the sort of Hyrax PCDM usage of Fedora 4 or any Fedora 3. I know there's been some interest in both of those, and so I think fleshing out those backends so that you could read Fedora 3 data or the Hyrax PCDM data would be sort of key things to implement to let people migrate from those platforms to a different platform.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Lynette is asking, for Fedora Solr, is this two Valkyrie API calls, one to write to Fedora and one to write to Solr?
And that's a little bit up to the application. Applications can choose whether they want to write to one or the other or both. And that's a big part of Data Mapper as a design pattern, is sort of separating models from persistence. And so in your application, you would configure which backends you wanted to use. And there's a sort of a backend that is just a wrapper around other backends that will synchronize to all of them that are added to a list. And so if you wanted to work just with Fedora, you could use just Fedora. But if you wanted to always write to Fedora and Solr, you could create a combo backend that would synchronize all of your data with Fedora and Solr each time you saved.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Esmé. I think we have about 2 more minutes left for question and answers, but I don't think we have any more questions. Let me check one more time. Yep. Okay. So you answered all the questions, Esmé. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and
Thank
you
you.
answered all very well. Okay. If anyone has any further questions for Esmé, please post it in the Slack channel. And next presentation is by Tom Johnson. The topic is Actor Refactor Contractor. Wow, that's a nice topic. Okay. Tom, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. We can. Okay, I'll mute myself.
Are people seeing my screen? I think I hit screen share and then things went pretty wonky.
I can see a screen, but I don't know if it is like that's what you intend to share. Yeah, now I can see it.
Oh, how about that? Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Looks good.
So Actor Refactor Contractor is both the title of this talk and one of my several current job titles. So this talk is about a particular much mystified piece of the Samvera stack. There will be parts of this that are specific to Hyrax at 2.x plus, but much of the history and general shape of this set of issues dates back through Sophia and appears in various Curation Concerns apps. So it's pretty endemic to the Samvera systems. We'll start with a little bit about where actors come from and what they are intended for, and then go over the interface as of Hyrax 2 and say a little bit about how you can customize actors. And then I'm going to talk about some of the problems and pitfalls and how to mitigate them. And then hopefully just with the last few minutes, talk about some work that I've been doing to explore a way forward, just so that I can surface that to everyone here. So where do actors come from? At some point in the past, we had this problem that is pretty common in Rails apps where you end up with a lot of business logic living sometimes between controllers and models. In our case, it was split between controllers and a set of modules that we just call services. So we had this problem where when a request came into a Samvera app, especially around creating, updating, or destroying works. So basic CRUD cycle for our key models. The behavior for what happened to them was split between a lot of business logic and controllers and some really complex and opaque services. And what the effect of this was is that the question of what happens when I create a work, or what happens when I destroy a work, or what happens when, what are all the steps to doing that, were basically impossible to answer, which made the code very rigid and hard to change. So at some point, a better approach, question mark, emerged. And initially that approach was, let's make this thing called actors, which will just say the actors do what they say on the tin, they act, which just in our context means they do something, which is not terribly inspiring, but at least is fairly clear. And the idea was that they would do one single thing, which is good object-oriented design, one single responsibility. And eventually they evolved into a thing that we could call rack middleware inspired, and first, and then later into something that was actually just rack middleware. And I'll unpack rack middleware in just a second. But so I should note that there are some things still to this day in Hyrax that are called actors that do not look anything like what we're talking about here. They are, for our purposes, not actors. Create file actor is one of those. That's just a legacy name from back in the days when actors were just anything that did anything. Okay, so rack middleware. Rack is a standard for talking between web server, so a web server like Puma or Passenger, etc., that passes requests and receives responses down to an app. So the app that I've defined here is just saying hello world to anything, and then what Rack provides is the standard for what a web server expects from an application, and then some software for adding what they call middleware. And Rails uses Rack, as does Sinatra. Basically, all the Ruby application frameworks are Rack related. So the idea behind the Rack middleware is that a request comes down and it's eventually going to make its way to the app, which is going to send back a response. But along the way, you can put in software to handle the request on the way down and the response on the way up, and do things like content negotiate the response, or avoid hitting the app altogether and return a cached response, or authenticate. Those are the examples that I've used here. So the idea is the request goes down, the response comes up, and the software does stuff in between. So our actor stack is inspired by this, I would say. And indeed, it uses the Rails middleware, Rack middleware software. And the basic idea is, if we're going to create a work, we pass it down to various actors which do work along the way. And then at the bottom, we hit a work actor or a base actor that does the save. And that you can imagine that that's the application, and then some work also happens on the way back up. The actor interface looks like this. So there are two big pieces. There's abstract actor, which is basically just the interface that all the actors themselves have to have. So they initialize with the next actor, which builds the stack. And then they respond to create, update, and destroy. And the contract is essentially that they receive an environment, which we'll get to below, and they return a Boolean, true if they succeed, and false in order to do nothing from this point. So they should call the next actor if they, so suppose you call create and pass in an environment. If you return false, then you should, then everybody else should not should not be doing any work. And if I return true, then I'm supposed to call the next actor along the way, so that actor can do its work. The actors receive an environment which has a curation concern, which just means that's legacy term for work. So it has a curation concern, some attributes which will be processed and applied to that. So you can think of these as just the form input, and then an ability to ensure that the user that's doing this work, that's requesting this work, has the correct permissions. Here's a custom actor. It says titleize all the titles before creating. And so that's a basic actor. Abstract actor provides kind of null interface or null implementations of create, update, and destroy, so you can override them. So common patterns when doing create, update, and destroy are to first validate and then call next actor, maybe alter the attributes and then call next actor, maybe call next actor and then do something like enqueue a job to do some background work after the work is created, or maybe validate, call next actor and then do something like enqueue a job. If you have custom actors that you want to include in your stack, there's an interface for doing that. So you can add an actor to the bottom of the stack by using actorfactory.use and just pass in the actor class. You can insert an actor after an existing actor or before an existing actor with insert after and insert before. And you can remove middleware with delete, or swap a custom middleware with a custom actor with for one that already exists in the stack. There's a pitfall here, which is that Hyrax and indeed Curation concerns and Sophia before it cache the actor stack once it's built. So you have to do this kind of editing before something else calls curation concern.actor, at which point the actor stack that's used throughout the application is built and cached for the life of the application. So this is work that you have to do in an initializer, and it's possible to accidentally do it too late in the initialization process and end up having all this work be a no-op. Just a quick aside on testing with the stack. A lot of the Hyrax tests don't create works or collections or really anything using the process that's in place realistically in the application. So the test objects are slightly less realistic. If you need realistic test objects that have been through the whole process that the actor stack or that your custom actor stack puts them through, I have a Hyrax spec gem that we use at Data Curation Experts that provides a custom build strategy for Factory Bot, which lets you just call actor create on any work factory that has a user. That user will then be the depositor. So that provides the ability, and then it just passes everything through the stack as you would expect. So you get a realistic object. Okay, so what are the pitfalls with the actor stack as it exists? Yeah, there you go. So the first is the idea that we have single responsibility. Actors in practice do all sorts of things. So this is a collection membership actor. You can see if you can read this that create first extracts collection ID, and then it assigns nested attributes for collection, and then it calls next actor. So the second line is maybe reasonable. The first line definitely, the fact that the first line exists definitely indicates that we're doing two things, and indeed that's quite an implementation for single responsibility. Thing two is that while maybe you can think of this as being one stack, because there are three different pipelines down it, it's really kind of three stacks. Part of the reason why you might try to justify this is that there's a lot of code sharing going on between create, update, and destroy for any given actor. I think the obvious response to that is, well, if we're single responsibility, why are we sharing code between these three things? So in any case, the three separate stacks make this a little bit more cumbersome and pretty different from the rack middleware that it's inspired by. Third is that there's a lot of mutation going on between the actors, which creates a rigid order dependence. So if you were to try to just swap in an actor to any place without having analyzed the entire stack, you probably are just going to error. And if you're trying to write custom actors, that sort of means that you have to understand the whole thing. So there's a lot of blurring going on, which defeats most of the purpose of why we are interested in actors to begin with. Right? The whole idea is that we want to be able to understand what happens when we create a work. So this is a little bit troubling. Compounding that is that there's no real error handling. So if I call create, I'm supposed to return true or false. But actually, I might return true or false or raise standard error. And the whole stack's short-circuited if standard error is raised, and there's nothing up at the top to catch it. So it's just an error to the user. Some amount of work will have happened. What work happened? I don't know. Guess you get to find out with forensics after the fact. And even when we do catch errors and return false, there's no consistent error reporting. So if you're trying to handle errors as the caller into the stack, you're out of luck. And compounding that even further is that there's some kind of hopeful but not very effective attempts at transaction handling here. So the whole stack is wrapped in a active record transaction. There's some Fedora optimistic lock validation at the top of the stack. But once you're in, if there's concurrent processes going on, Fedora locking is right out the window. And the effect is that if you fail after you've tried to create an object in Fedora, you'll get a rollback of database state, but not of Fedora state. And that can be super problematic because you end up with objects that should have things like permissions in them that do not, because the permissions live in the database and or the permission templates for the admin sets rather live in the database. But the objects live in Fedora. Solar is completely unhandled. You might just hope that active Fedora is doing a good job of keeping Fedora and Solar in sync, at least. And then compounding that is that we're enqueuing all sorts of background jobs, and how those get handled with respect to the database locking depends on your queue adapter. And you can end up in situations where if the job kicks off before the actor stack is done and the transaction commits, you get errors, or if you are running inline, then you end up with the jobs within the transaction. If you're delayed, you might be outside the transaction. So there's a lot of question about what the effectiveness of this locking is, and whether it's just hurting us more than it's helping. So here's the main issue that talks about this. Is number 1308. You can see that it's been there for a bit. So if you're working with the actor stack, you can do a couple things to try and keep this mitigated. One is to really keep at least your custom actors simple, like really make them do one thing. If there's more than 10 or 15 lines of code, you might be doing too many things. The other thing that sort of flows from that is you can move business logic into collaborator objects, which means that you could do code sharing between both actors and other processes that might want to do similar tasks, and you avoid that very long handling that we saw in the collections actor. So the idea is basically, if you're doing work, you should be able to find a spot in the code other than the actors to put that, and the actors really just become dispatch and handling the actual stack process. Another thing that you can do is restrict mutations, firstly to just the attributes. So if you're changing the input, that's healthy. If you're changing other things along the way, then you might be causing problems for yourself and making it really hard to diagnose what's happening in the stack. And then further restrict those mutations to on the way down. So once you've saved the work, don't be changing anything. Do other work outside, but don't affect the things that the next actor is going to see, because that makes it really hard to reason about what's happening in the stack, and it compounds that order dependence problem. You can perform side effects, but only on the way up. So you should enqueue jobs after you've called next actor and not before. And then handle your errors carefully. And when I first put this down, I thought, oh, gee, that's super unhelpful. Handle your errors carefully. Like we could just say that about any code. But I think that for actors, there's some better advice that I can offer, which is validate and fail eagerly on the way down the stack. So make sure you've got input that you expect to succeed, and fail before anybody is saving any works, so that you don't end up in a partially saved state. And then be fault tolerant on the way back up, so that actors above you can keep doing their work, even if your actor didn't do a very good job of it. So what's next? For much of the spring, I've had a kind of side project. On trying to figure out a better way of handling the issues that the actor stack presents us. And after some conversations at LDCX with Chris Colvard, we started some work on a re-implementation using dry transactions. And you heard about dry briefly during Esmé's Q&A. This is just a set of Ruby libraries that provide like basic implementations of common things. And dry transactions is a business transaction library. So the ethos here is do small steps that are discrete, move in a single direction. So this is, quote, railway-oriented programming. And you can see the image below. In the case that we fail, we move down to the failure track. But otherwise, we carry on through on the success track. Business transactions should be stateless, which means that they are not order dependent and they don't change things that other business transactions rely on, or other steps in the transaction rather. And then they have a single return type, which is a success failure monad, basically. And so it wraps, success wraps the input for the next step, failure wraps the error output, and that's pretty much the whole interface. And I have a branch for this that I can show you. My trick about how we get from here to there is to create actors that short circuit the stack and optionally call into the business transaction. So my hope is that we can start getting this work into the code base as an optional track, and then we can go ahead and see it in production and take it from there. And that's it. Do we have questions?
Yeah, we have 2 questions. So thanks for the presentation. First question is by Nathan. Is there a performance hit for handling all these actions sequentially instead of handling some of them concurrently?
So the answer to that is sort of yes and no. There's not a, as far as I know, there's not a significant overhead to the actor stack approach over just doing this as an imperative style. So yes, there's always overhead to putting abstractions in your code. No, I don't think that that's a factor in the processing that is happening here.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew is asking, can you elaborate on the way down versus on the way up? Is that referring simply to the order in an actor does its own work relative to calling the next actor's create, update, destroy methods, or is there more to it? And
yeah.
Also, maybe
okay.
Justin has already answered this in the chat, but if you want to elaborate on it.
Well, I hope that my response is the same as Justin's. So yeah, it's basically, do you do the work before you call down to next actor, or do you do the work after you call next actor? And you can, again, visualize that by analogy to the rack application, where somewhere down at the bottom, there's a base actor that's doing the work of saving the object to Fedora. And then any work that happens after that point, you can conceive of as on the way up.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Next question by Jonathan. Have you considered no longer having actors responsible for calling next actor in linked list fashion, but instead having the stack itself invoke actors depending on results of called actors? I have thought sometimes this might help enforce single responsibility and separation decoupling order independence, rather than rely on actors to follow mitigation guidelines on what to do on way drop down or up.
Yeah, so this is fairly close to what is being proposed with the dry transactions. It's not exactly the same because there's still some assumption that handling is happening through the work, but I can show you an example of actor step or a step in my dry transactions implementation. Let me see if I can browse code here. That's not where I want to go. So transaction steps. So my steps look much more like this. I'll zoom that in. So more or less, we're talking about single lines followed by return values. And that's basically the implementation of every step that I've got to so far. Oh, there we go.
Mm-hmm. Looks good. Okay, I think we can take one more question. And this would be the last question by Josh. Do side effects on the way up have potential to mutate the state and cause the result of the active stack to be different if it was reprocessed?
So yes, definitely. And that's one thing that is not resolved necessarily by this dry transactions approach. So there's no like safe rollback. But yeah, any work that happens in the stack really anywhere is going to make it so that running the same effect again is not going to succeed necessarily. So the simplest example of this is that that in the default stack as it ships with Hyrax, you call into the stack for create, and there's some checking to make sure that the object doesn't already exist. And it really, like, it doesn't take very far into the stack before you break that. So if you fail even fairly early, it can be pretty nasty trying to come. It can be pretty nasty trying to do anything afterwards as the caller to the stack. So some work has happened, and now if I try again, then it's just going to fail, saying that work already exists.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds good. Okay. That was all the questions. So thank you, Tom. Really appreciate your time in presenting this. It was really helpful. If anybody has any more questions, please post it on the Slack channel. And now is the time for the break. We will be taking about 20 minutes break, and then we will reconvene at 1 o'clock Eastern time, and we'll continue with the lightning talks and interest and working group updates. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We'll start with the virtual lightning talks. We have 6 lightning talks, 7 minutes each, followed by 15 minutes question and answers. You can follow the same process, put in your questions in the chat. And the format would be first write down the lightning talk title or the presenter's name and your question, and we will compile all the questions, and I'll be reading the questions at the end of all the lightning talks. So I will hand it over to our first lightning talk. It is by Adam. Sorry, the first lightning talk is update on Hyrax roadmap. Steve, are you ready?
Yeah, I think I'm ready. I suspect I'm sharing my screen now.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Oh, very good. Well, I just gave away my secret picture of Hyraxes. So I'm Steve Van Tile. I'm a digital repository librarian at Oregon State University, and I'm also the product owner for Hyrax. Tom Johnson is also on, and he may chime in as I get things wrong. But for the most part, what I want to do is give a quick update on where we are with the Hyrax roadmap. So the Hyrax roadmap was created, what, now maybe a year ago by me and Mike Jarlow. And we had a huge amount of input from the community at Connect last year and wound up with a roadmap that maybe sets Hyrax in the right direction for a lot of people's needs. But we're always looking for feedback. And this is actually me and Mike Jarlow and someone else creating the roadmap right there, dressed as Hyraxes.
Hi, Steve.
Uh-oh.
Your screen is white.
What?
Yeah. Do you want to try stopping and starting again, or I can jump in and share screen, and you can carry on talking?
I do want to stop sharing, and will you try sharing and see if it works?
Yeah.
Oh, yours works better.
Okay. So there's you.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, there we are making the roadmap. So if you go to the next slide. So what are we trying to do with Hyrax? This is a little quote out of the roadmap that we put together. The goal here is for Hyrax to be an opinionated, though configurable, base for both institutional and data repositories, as well as digital collection repositories. Right, so we're trying to provide a starting point for a variety of repository types coming out of Hyrax. So next slide. So there's a lot of like high things flying around, Hyraxes and haikus and high whats. But we thought maybe it would be useful to highlight some of the following. So we have Hyrax as this engine or starting point, and a few applications out there that are or plan to be sitting on top of Hyrax, like Haiku, like Avalon, and like Tenejo. We also wanted to point out that there, because we get this question a fair bit, there are a few implementations of Hyrax out there in the wild. There's a smattering of them listed here that you can go visit and actually see what a live Hyrax instance with real data looks like. There's also a link there to a list on the wiki of implementations. And if you have one that's not on that list, please add yourself.
And we'll post these slides in just a moment.
Yeah. And then there are a handful of folks or organizations who are providing hosting services for Hyrax or Hyrax applications, and some of them are listed there. There's a link at the bottom of that list to a page for Hyrax contractors and Hyrax hosting services on the wiki. So if you are of that sort, you maybe ought to update that page. So let's go forward. So what are the things that we wanted to do with the Hyrax roadmap? Collection extensions, we just heard about that. That's been implemented. We're getting the analytics work ramped back up. We were waiting for the 2.1 release to drop. So we're looking to restart that effort. We have ongoing UI enhancements. We'll probably see ongoing enhancements in that area throughout the 2.x release series. The Hyrax working group has started up. We can talk more later about what that is. But they're probably going to be tackling a lot of accessibility issues that are lingering or that were brought up in the accessibility audit that we conducted a while back. There's a great group led by the folks at Notre Dame on permissions and whatnot. So they're moving forward with that work, and we maybe will hear a little bit about that later today. There's a new working group that's being led by Julie Allenson and Tom Johnson on batch functionality, so upload, edit, and download, and management of content at the kind of batch scale. And then we just heard about the swappable backends. So that's ongoing work, but still part of the roadmap. So we have 1 more minute. Tom, you want to go to the next slide? Out of all of our feedback, we heard a lot about a need for process improvements in the community. So there are a number of things that the community has been doing to improve process, things like documentation or QA testing. And then the other thing that we've done with Hyrax is to try to democratize what happens with Hyrax a little bit. So we have product owner and tech lead, but we also have this cigar, this interest group to help kind of inform what happens with Hyrax. So please participate in that.
Hey, Steve, sorry to interrupt, but we're going to need to move to the next lightning talk.
Cool. So we'll take questions offline or later. Thanks.
I'm trying to figure out how to stop sharing, but I think somebody might have to stop me.
Okay. Or Will and Moira, maybe you can start sharing your screen.
I can't start sharing while another participant is sharing.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So this is Will Sexton at Duke University Libraries. I'm here with Maura Downey, and we're going to talk about a Samvera, a Hyrax project that we've been working on for some time. So I'm going to provide a little bit of background. Beginning in January of 2017, we were fortunate to be able to bring in 4 new staff members to support research data management services, as well as services for preserving and providing access to research data produced by Duke researchers using the Duke Digital Repository. Since January of 2017, we've brought in some 43 research data sets from Duke researchers using the current Fedora 3 Hydra stack that we have. We refer to this as DDR Classic. Late last year, we began working on a new project to support research data, the Research Data Repository, or RDR is what we call it internally, which we began to implement in Hyrax. We began sprinting in November of last year. In June, we released a prototype that we're using to share with stakeholders in the libraries and at Duke, and our plan is to put it into production on August 28th. For us, this is both an opportunity to build a new platform for research data and to explore Hyrax as a possible future for DDR and all of, or some of what is currently implemented in the DDR Classic stack. The first rule of Research Data Repository in terms of our interactions with stakeholders is that all deposits are mediated by the curation team, of which Maura is a member. And as we dug into Hyrax self-deposit, we found that that functionality really didn't work for a mediated submission model. So our development plans have included the integration of a submission workflow using the Box API. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Maura, and she's going to tell you about that aspect of the project.
Okay, so this is our reworked homepage. The prompt to begin sharing data is only found here at the moment. All other upload options have been removed for non-curators. Just to give you a sense, this is the dataset show page. These are the possible actions for the work, and the only 2 of these buttons that will appear for non-curators in the public view are export files and request modifications, which is meant to give which will only show on works that have been deposited on the user's behalf to allow researchers to request changes to their data. Clicking on the Get Started button, Get Started Sharing Your Data button on the home page will lead to the data submission form, which lives behind Shibboleth authentication and has been written into the Hyrax application code. We're currently running 2.1. Authenticating through Shibboleth also creates an account in the application for first-time users with proxy deposit rights automatically granted to the curators group. The data submission form starts with a series of triage questions asking the potential depositor about things like whether their data contains personally identifying information or personal health information, if the data are generated by a grant-funded project, and what's the size of their data. If the data don't meet our criteria for deposit, the user's given a message explaining that someone from the data curation team will be in touch to provide further consultation, and an email is sent to the team's listserv with that person's net ID and any answers they've already provided to give us a sense of how we can be of further assistance. If the depositor does meet our requirements for data, for deposit, they're prompted to supply metadata for the data set. After completing the metadata portion of the form, the submitter receives an email with a record of that metadata and a link to a box folder that's automatically shared with the data curation team. This folder is automatically populated with a text file containing language of the deposit agreement to which the researcher has agreed, including their name, net ID, and the date they electronically signed, which we're planning to keep as internally available documents. There's also a stub CSV metadata manifest that contains submitter-supplied metadata, so put a pin in that. Submitters can upload their files to the box folder and are instructed to notify the data curation listserv when they're finished uploading. Curators can then go in and pull down the data set to their local machines, take any needed actions, or recommend changes to the researcher. All this communication with the researcher continues to happen through email at this point. So, on our end, so for reasons that should be obvious, we wanted a way to create multiple nested works all at once. So here's an example of why. It's a data set with 5 years of instrumentation readings made available by month and year, and we didn't want to create a work for each month with slightly different metadata, and we wanted all those months to be nested under the main data set. So in the dashboard, curators now see an option to batch import. RDR batch import sort of riffs on the Haiku CSV importer. Curators will use the stub metadata CSV that's generated by the submission process to create an ingest manifest. Each row creates a new work. Files attached to the work are enumerated using the path to their location on a staging server. Since all works in the RDR are assigned archival resource keys, the nested relationship between child and parent works are established by inserting arcs into the manifest. Curators will additionally provide the location of the files. After the files are in the application, curators have the option to assign and register a DOI. Duke has kind of struck out on our own by using the Crossdraft service in their API. Once that's done, curators will email the researcher with a link to their data in the application and their DOI, even though that's kind of the same thing. Some big issues we still see: Box can only take files up to 15 gigs in size, and that's not a great way to share tons of files anyway, so we're going to have to think about ways to handle data sets that are on the larger end. Globus is on our radar. A sort of related problem is that bringing data sets down to our local machines is not really great, and we may try to find a way to leverage the work that's gone into the Browse Everything gem. And then finally, this workflow still means a lot of back and forth with the researcher, some of which is kind of baked into the ethos of our data curation program, but some of which could probably be taken off the researcher's plate and further automated. And we will stick around for questions.
Thank you, Will and Moira. Next up is Jen Young.
Yes, I am sharing my screen, hopefully. I'm Jen Young, and I'm the metadata coordinator at Northwestern University, and I'm presenting on behalf of myself and Julie Hardesty, who is my counterpart at Indiana University on the Avalon project. And today we're going to talk about Avalon's audiovisual work in Hyrax in about time. So right now, our status for Avalon 6.x, I believe the release is 6.2. Metadata right now is stored as RDF only for our administrative, structural, and technical metadata. Our descriptive metadata is still stored as a MOZ XML file. So we are planning for Avalon 7 to develop this as more of a plugin for Hyrax. This expands on the Hyrax default work type, and it moves us from the MOZ XML to an RDF-based model. I just want to also emphasize that no Avalon descriptive fields that are currently available are going to go away in this mapping to Avalon 7. Excuse me. So to extend the model, we've added some fields that we already use in our audiovisual catalog, such as expanding the note and note types. These are just some examples: performers, table contents. There's also production credits. For subjects, we've subdivided or parsed out into topical, geographical, and temporal. And for identifiers, some of the examples here are the LCCN of a record, OCLC number, matrix number, audiovisual recording numbers. And we have our current release, which is tied to our .2 model in our Avalon Bundle Wiki in the Samvera Labs GitHub repo. And you can see it all at this link. So you're in Hyrax and you have the Avalon plugin installed, and you're going to go and add a new work. A new type of work type appears. Now you can select an audiovisual work right from the bat. Same Avalon fields, just in a Hyrax interface. So this is the title, publication date, and we would have the other fields that we've defined available here as well. So for next, and what's next, our current roadmap is that we are going to refine our model for the next Avalon release cycle, which will be .3. And during this cycle, we're adding our controlled vocabularies. Right now, we don't have any. Ideally, people do reference controlled vocabularies when they're entering data, but it's not structured in any way. We also want to add our, make sure that the rightstatement.org is integrated into our model. It seems to be out of the box, but just making sure that it will work. And then we also want to add validation to these fields so that, you know, it validates and it's all good. Looking ahead later on, we have some, for later releases, is that we have a batch ingest spreadsheet that we want to update and make sure that it reflects all the changes that we've made and that it will work as part of the Hyrax model. And then we also want to make sure to develop a migration path for those who are going from Avalon 6 to an Avalon 7 model in Hyrax. And that was really quick, but that was it. And I'm sure I'm here, and Julie is here to also answer any questions you might have at the end. So thank you. And we have a metadata Slack channel in the Samvera Slack as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Next up is Chris.
Sorry, just give me 1 second.
Yep, we can see a screen.
Okay, can you see the slide still?
It's blank.
Let me try this again.
You stopped sharing. I cannot see anything. Now I can see it.
You can see the slides now? Great. My name is Chris Colvard, and I work on Avalon. My colleague, Adam Arling, is will join us for Q&A, but is in the airport headed to a React conference. Today, I'm going to talk about IIIF Presentation 3.0 API. So starting off, what is IIIF? You may have heard IIIF, and I've taken this definition from Tom Kramer of a community that develops shared APIs, implements them in software, and exposes interoperable content. So IIIF has a number of APIs. Today we'll focus on Presentation API, which is really about bundling together all the information necessary for showing a work, a digital object, to a human user, and providing a rich kind of interface for working with it, for analyzing it, and annotating it. So why bother with this API? And as the name IIIF implies, it's this interoperability. With this kind of shared contract, of what's needed to drive a player, a viewer, a kind of user experience. Also allows for all different kinds of servers to implement that API and serve up that manifest, that bundle of information, and allows clients to take it and render it, and there's a clear understanding of what's necessary. And then applications can choose whatever kind of client they want. So you may have seen in Hyrax 2.1, IIIF through Universal Viewer as the client is available as an option. You can configure your Hyrax to display something like this. This is from Nurax, where a manuscript is being shown with many many pages, and user can go through and do a lot with it, as opposed to having to page through page image by image. So that's images. What about audio-visual content? The AV Technical Specification Group started in spring 2016 as a British library, and has been really trying to figure out how to extend that richness of IIIF to time-based media. And kind of the culmination of that work has been on a new version of the presentation API, one that allows for audiovisual content or time-based media. And there's an alpha draft that was approved at the IIIF conference in May at the Library of Congress. So it's moving to beta, and hence the beta max. And kind of with all of this, we hope that we can fulfill the promise of this Sony Betamax ad of watch whatever, whenever. So what does the API look like? There's an entity kind of diagram on the right. The big changes from presentation 2 is that canvases now can have a time dimension. And in fact, they can maybe only have a time dimension if they're audio. And this is all kind of projected to be released near the end of this year. So kind of an early experiment looks like this, where there's a canvas, there's an image, text, 2 videos being played, and things can kind of come and go from the canvas as time progresses. That's pretty powerful, and Avalon doesn't need quite that much. But what we've been doing so far to bring this into Hyrax is adding support for this new version of presentation API into IIIF manifest, adding better kind of capture of technical metadata from characterization and Hydra Works, and then doing work within our Hyrax-based application Avalon Bundle to kind of allow you to choose a viewer that's not universal viewer or kind of content negotiation to handle the different versions of the API. Here's one of these manifests. It's a JSON LD document, and it's at this URL. This is pretty much what came out of our Avalon Bundle Hyrax app. So take that and put it into this React prototype player, and this is what you get. You get a player, you get some structural navigation links for kind of like chapters or sections of this video. And this React player was built by Adam, and it's packaged up as a npm yarn package. And we've included an Avalon Bundle with some code, pretty much what's on the right. You can take that same manifest and plug it into Universal Viewer's example page. It's kind of the latest Universal Viewer, and you get the same thing. You get that interoperability. It's the video and the structural navigation, and things kind of work the same as expected. So coming up next for us is to try to extract some of this work we've done within Avalon Bundle out into plugins or kind of PRs to Hyrax. Continuing work on how to deal with streaming and external derivatives. That structural metadata you saw, we want to try to make a nice clean editor for it, for generating that structure. Implementing playlists with presentation API, and implementing the authentication API from IIIF. So if any of these sound like use cases you're really interested in, or want to help us with, or hear feedback and give all those various things, reach out and contact us, and we'd be happy to talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Next up is Todd.
Hello. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Hello. I'm Todd Crocken I'm the content strategist for Bridge IQ, and I'm located at U of H. So basics, our project aims to produce a community resource that will assist institutions considering a migration from their current digital content delivery system, mainly Content DM, to Haiku or Hyrax platforms. The B2H toolkit will include general information about digital collection migration planning, specific information about modeling data for and migrating to Haiku, and software tooling for analyzing and extracting data. So as I've said, the goals are really a website, the toolkit, and then community support. This is the earliest design we had of what we were hoping to produce. So timeline-wise, we're actually about a third of the way through the grant project. In phase 1, we conducted a needs assessment survey, and we're currently in the middle of doing testing on current tools and deciding the MVPs for the toolkit that we will produce. So phase 1, we hired me. I came on in about the end of January, and I'm not really a librarian, so I had to kind of get up to speed for everything. We had a digital collection survey that was done by all 4 partner institutions. This kind of helped give a roadmap, an idea of what everyone's Content DM digital collections looked like. And we've also brought up the website. The website, if you want to look at it, it's at bridgetoiq.github.io. It currently has blog posts, Haiku features. It has a link to the collection survey, and also it'll have the collection survey results soon. It'll also have a migration best practices and links to other useful sites and resources. So in phase 2, we've generated use cases for MVP. That was through a 6-week working group that Ann Washington did with some of the other members, Dean Seaman, Paul Clow. And from that, we have about 20 different use cases and user stories that we're going to be using within the MVP. A couple weeks ago, we did a troubleshooting sprint with University of Victoria CDM Migrator. We're going to be next week starting a sprint to help fix that up for Hyrax 2.0. And the website, we've been doing blog posts on specific issues. Currently, the tools in development are a Haiku Vagrant stack that was built by Sean Watkins at U of H. We added the CDM Migrator to that tool, and with this, you can set up Haiku on a Vagrant and use the CDM Migrator gem to pull from your CDM and grab the CSV and files and send it to the Haiku. So with this, you can do a full test migration just in a Vagrant. Next, we're building out a CDM bridge, which is an Electron app that will easily crosswalk CDM metadata to the Haiku mapping. And this is going to be an easy way to export CSVs and an easy way to look at what metadata fields you have within your CDM. We are also going to be building a ingest gem for the Haiku Hyrax stack, and hopefully being able to use that within testing later on this year. If you're looking to contribute, you can join the Content DM migration interest group on Slack, or email me or Andy. Follow our Twitter and check us out on GitHub. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Next up is Nicholas. When Nicholas shares the screen, I just wanted to point out, if you look in the chat window, there are links to community notes documents and some of the slide presentations. On to you, Nicholas.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, I am Nick Woodward from Texas Digital Library. I'm going to talk briefly.
Sorry to interrupt you. I can see your screen, but not fully. I don't know if it's just me or everyone. It seems like it's cut off.
Okay, let me try again.
Okay, that's good now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Woodward from the Texas Digital Library. I'm going to talk briefly about the Haiku Service Provider Group and what the different members have been up to. Here you can see all the different organizations and institutions that have contributed time and effort towards the Haiku Working Group. You'll notice there's a variety in the types of members we have, with universities and nonprofit organizations, consortia, and private sector members. It's also an international group. What we're doing. So we have monthly meetings that are the last Tuesday of every month at 11 a.m. We are working on becoming a Samvera interest group in the Samvera community. Crystal Richardson of Notch 8 has agreed to be the chair. It's a bit of a work in progress, but the group's statement of interest or purpose is the following. The Haiku Interest Group discusses the Haiku repository application, particularly focusing on keeping its development aligned with the Hyrax maturation. Group members are interested in working together to contribute to the maintenance and development of Haiku. CoSector is a department of the University of London in charge of, among other things, digital services. They recently launched an instance of Haiku for a small UK health provider. Their work to date has focused on migrating digital objects from ePrints into Haiku. And subsequently, one product of that work is a JSON-based importer, which you can find on GitHub. Notch 8 is a Ruby on Rails consultancy based out of San Diego that has been helping businesses and institutions with their software needs since 2007. They've been working with the Samvera community since 2016 and are currently actively involved in Haiku. They are particularly interested in Haiku performance on the back end. And as part of that work, they intend to incorporate Valkyrie, which we heard about earlier this morning, and measure its impact on performance. The Texas Digital Library, where I work, is a consortium of 22 higher education institutions in Texas. We recently conducted a Haiku pilot that lasted from January until June of this year with 3 of our members, the University of Houston, the University of Texas at Austin, and Trinity University. The final report from that pilot will be completed and made available to the public very soon. We've also joined on the Bridge to Haiku project, which we just heard about. So as a result, we'll be launching more instances of Haiku and Hyrax this fall. Naturally, we'll be focused on migration tooling from other IR platforms, such as Content DM and DSpace, into Haiku. And there are a few organizations working on that tooling. There's some application and some software available there in the links. Ubiquity Press is an open access publisher of peer-reviewed academic journals, books, and data. They were awarded a grant to develop a multi-tenant Haiku instance for the British Library, and they're currently running said pilot with 3 institutions that you see there. They're currently working on several issues related to haiku, such as UI, UX, shibboleth integration, custom work types, a lot of the things that you see being worked on in Hyrax. So the future, in the 24th and a half century, there are more haiku developments in the pipeline. Group members will continue to work on migration tooling and developing the haiku codebase. To date, the development that has taken place has been roughly focused on the issues that were highlighted in the gap assessment conducted last year by Duraspace. Finally, there are two consortia of higher education institutions, PALNI and PALKI, that are interested in multi-tenancy with Hyrax, and they both intend to pilot a haiku development very soon. So how to get involved? There are multiple ways to stand up an instance of haiku. The Samvera Labs and the University of Houston have Vagrant scripts to do so. There are also Docker scripts available on GitHub. The workflow for fixing issues and committing them to the haiku codebase has been worked out in recent weeks, and development is ongoing. You can attend a monthly meeting, and please feel free to join the haiku Slack channel in the Samvera Slack community. Finally, it's not on the slide, but there are links throughout this presentation to the work that people have already done on haiku. And any of us in the group would be happy to answer your questions and guide you in the right direction. That's it. Please feel free to reach out to any of us in the haiku working group, and we'd love to chat about what we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicholas. Okay, so that was the end of all the lightning talks, and now is the time for the question and answers. We have already a few questions lined up. And please feel free to put more questions in the chat. So the first question we have is for Moira and Will. Question by Catherine. Are they linking their Hyrax instance to symplectic elements, and or do they have plans to do so?
Hi, this is Will. So we responded in Slack, but we'll share for everyone. We do not link or integrate with symplectic elements in Hyrax. We do use DSpace for our open access publications, kind of part of the institutional repository, and we do integrate with symplectic elements there. We're kind of interested in avenues for integrating with symplectic elements, but it's not a priority for us right now. It's something that we're thinking about down the road. Did you want to add anything more? Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay. Are there any more questions? So we are running ahead of schedule. We still have 20 minutes to start the interest group and working group updates. We can wait a few more minutes if anyone has any questions, or we can go to the interest group working group updates. Or if any of the lightning talk presenters want to say anything more. Yeah, Ellen just pointed out that a lot of questions have been answered in Slack. Okay. Shall we go ahead with the interest group working group updates, and maybe we can finish off 15-20 minutes earlier. Okay. So let's do that. So next up is interest and working groups updates. And the way these are set up, it's one slide deck, and every member, the co-chairs of the working or interest group would be giving a 2-minute update. And if you have any questions, then those questions can be answered in the Slack channel or the chat. Okay. And Ellen would be driving the slide deck. Okay. Okay, so the first group is repo managers, and Julie and I are the co-chairs, and Julie cannot be here right now, so I will just go over the updates. We meet regularly 4th Wednesday of the month, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The Slack channel is repo-managers. And this group is, it used to be Hydra PMSig, then Hydra, actually it was merged. The PMSig and the service manager, the project management and the service management group was merged into one, and then it was called repo managers. So this is a group where all kind of managers can join. Whether you manage a project or a service manager, or you are interested in seeing how the projects are managed, you are welcome to join this group. We met a few times to go over the new features in Hyrax, talked about research data for Hyrax and collections extension work, and we were called upon to provide use cases and give feedback on Hyrax. Next slide, please. Thank you. And time to time, new members, members share their projects, and we will continue to provide use cases and give feedback on Hyrax. Next is Ryan.
Hi, this is Ryan Steens. This group is fairly new. We're meeting the second Thursday of the month, but we've only met a couple of times. This group had existed a few months ago and just recently reformed. For the first meeting, we talked to Oregon State and heard about their experience moving over to Hyrax from DSpace, and we plan to reach out to some other folks who are on that path. Next slide, yeah. We're really would like, if you have a DSpace locally and you're even considering this, it's something we'd love to hear from you about what your experience is, what your concerns are. And so we'll collect information and get documentation from the work done at these other schools who have moved from DSpace to Samvera. And basically, we're just getting started, so we'd love to have your input at this point. Woodward, I know that you're working on this sort of stuff, so I'd love to talk to you. We can move to the next. This is a different one. The Samvera Governance Working Group is pretty much, as of today, I think, done with this work. We've been meeting since last fall. We can jump to the next slide. We've gotten a lot accomplished. We did our due diligence and pulled together information that had previously existed from various surveys and whatnot of the community. And we put together some draft recommendations based on that information. Put out a webinar about the draft recommendations for governance, basically to pull together a roadmap for the community and do some other things that that the community had interest in, got some feedback, and put out the final recommendations. Next slide, please. So we did have 4 major recommendations, and they are currently being implemented. If you've been paying attention the past month or two, we did just recently run an election for Samvera steering that has come to conclusion with 100% voting out of the partners. So all of that is done, and we'll look to steering now to implement the other 3 recommendations as they move forward. And hopefully I didn't do more than 120 seconds there.
You did great, Ryan. Thank you. Next group is Jeremy, permission analysis and design. And I believe Jeremy is not online. I will just read through his slides. He's the facilitator of this group, and the regular meeting time is alternate Fridays at 2 Eastern Time. The Slack channel is PAWG, and the activities since last connect were chartered and have met 11 times, created and normalized use cases, created community report and request for input. Okay. And it says that they are working to analyze the community-provided permission use cases and then design a means for addressing those community use cases with an eye towards ensuring clarity and configurability for local installations, then making a recommendation for implementation. Wow. Okay, next slide. So next up is Eben.
Hi, this is Eben English. I'm a repository developer at Boston Public Library, and I'm the facilitator for the Samvera Newspapers Interest Group. So we meet first Thursday of the month. There's a link to our wiki page where there's meeting notes and other things like that. Basically what this group does is just provides a discussion space for talking about managing newspaper collections within Samvera and Fedora-based systems. If you currently have newspaper content, or you plan to have newspaper content in the near future, if you have newspaper content in some other kind of system like Veridian or Content DM, and you are thinking about migrating that material into a Samvera or Fedora type of a system, this is a good group to be involved in. It's also sort of tangentially related to the Newspapers in Samvera IMLS grant project that BPL and the University of Utah have been working on for about a year now, and we have another year left in the grant. But we also provide updates on the work that's ongoing with the grant, and we sort of bounce ideas off of people in terms of some of the directions and design decisions that we make as part of the grant development stuff. Next slide, please. So since the Connect, which I think was actually in 2017, my fault there, sorry. We've been working on refining a PCDM profile for newspaper content, which is accessible at that link. We've been sort of exploring ingest use cases, documenting those more specifically. A lot of people say, I want to migrate from Content DM, or I want to ingest Mets Alto, or I want to ingest NDNP data. So we're trying to sort of break down exactly what that means from an ingest standpoint in terms of what files are created, what metadata exists, what derivatives need to be created for different use cases, et cetera. We're also trying to gather content examples from different institutions, which we've been working on. So if you have, we're sort of building a little repository, not really a repository, but basically like a set of content examples of actual binary files and metadata that are exported from Content DM or NDNP data, et cetera, that we can use as a sort of base to build applications against. We also do user experience review of various functions for newspaper digital libraries, and talk about what we like, what we don't like. And we've also been looking at different JSON serializations of word coordinate data, that being word coordinate data being a product of the OCR process, where you don't just get the words from the page, you also get where in the image those words appear, and then how to best serialize that data so it can be used by applications. So that's kind of what we've been up to lately, and we hope to see you at our next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Evan. Next one is, next slide, Content DM.
Cool. Hello, I'm Todd Crocken again. The Content DM Migration Interest Group. The facilitator is Andy here at U of H. He's out today. The regular meeting time is 2 p.m. Eastern on the third Thursday of each month, and we have a Slack channel at Hydra-Migrations. The activity since last Connect, I believe the interest group was revived in 2018, mainly because Content DM is no longer going to help with local instances. So I think most people in the group are worried about getting out before there's no help with their local instances. We mainly compare notes and tools that we're using for our export out of Content DM, what kind of metadata remediation we're going to do, and how we plan to ingest in the Samvera apps. Next slide. So British IQ, we're probably going to be getting community members in this interest group to help us with our toolkit this winter and autumn. If anyone is in any stage of their migration process from Content DM or DuraSpace, you should probably join this group. No question is too dumb. No question is too broad. It's a pretty good place. Pretty much every meeting we have someone showing a tool or showing a use case that they've been working on. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Todd. Next is Jessica for Hyrax Working Group.
I think this is actually going to be Steve and I. Okay. This is Tom Johnson. So Jessica is the facilitator of the Hyrax Working Group and is out of town. So the Hyrax Working Group is a set of dedicated resources. Again, thanks, like the slide says, thanks to the generous contributions from 6 institutions. We have standing development resources working more or less full-time on alternating 2-week sprints. So we do 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. The very first sprint started on July 9th. And can we advance slide? So our first sprint focus has been on getting ourselves organized, seeing how we work together, and doing some of the cleanup and miscellaneous work that fell out of scope for the 2.1 release. So we've prioritized the issues in a backlog with a sprint board that you see linked below. It's project number 5 in Hyrax. Our next sprint we expect to be focused on implementing some of the accessibility improvements that have been called out through the accessibility review process, and that the accessibility working group has been dutifully and very helpfully putting into tickets in Hyrax. The future focus will be moving on with the Hyrax WG, the Hyrax roadmap priorities. And there will be some evaluation at 6 months. We'll be putting out information as frequently as possible, especially with the interest of re-upping resources and perhaps finding new people to cycle onto the group at that time. And I think that's it. Steve, do you have anything to add?
Nope, that sounds good.
Okay, thank you, Tom and Steve. Next is UX Interest Group.
All right, this is Adam Arley, co-facilitator with Nick Dragovich from Emory. And UX Interest Groups, we meet the third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern. Slack channel, UX Interest Group. And so I came on board with the UX Interest Group at the time Samvera Connect last year. So since then, we kind of been focused on 2 main things. First is kind of processing the results of the Accessibility 360 audit report. For this, I'm going to give a a big thank you and shout out to Harsh Parekh from Notre Dame and Michael Trebone from Penn State for kind of spearheading this and doing a lot of really helpful, good organizational work to take basically most like the line items, which I think there's well over 100 in the Accessibility 360 report. And what our accessibility subgroup kind of did was kind of organize those into 3 different priority levels: so critical, serious, and warning. We took that and cross-referenced the report findings against existing Hyrax GitHub issues, and found any matches. We just made sure that tickets and issues were updated and relevant with the latest findings. And then in addition, we created 44 new GitHub issues that seem to be as yet undiscovered. So kind of organized all those under a milestone for the 2.x accessibility milestone. And it looks like this will turn into the future Hyrax working group scope work. You can go to the next slide, please. What's next on the radar for the UX interest group? The second round of distributed user research testing. This will be kind of spearheaded by Nick. And this will kind of like focus, initially we're discussing maybe focusing on the collection extensions for the newer features in Hyrax. It's going to be slated for late summer, early fall. Targeted user persona will be repository managers or admins within the system. And it'll use Hyrax as the common testing ground. So keep an eye out. Probably be reaching out for volunteers in this effort beginning in August 2018 with the end goal of producing some findings and presenting at Samvera Connect 2018. And then lastly, I think we've also been talking about maybe reframing UX interest group into more of a kind of a umbrella group, platform like demos and discussion, and then out of that spawn subgroups. Sorry if it's loud in the background. I think that's pretty much it. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Okay. Next up is metadata interest group.
Hi, this is Ruth Tillman. I'm a facilitator of the metadata interest group along with Julie Hardesty from IU. We meet on the 4th Thursday of every month from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, and our info is on the wiki if you want to join us on those calls. We also have the Slack channel metadata. So since the last Connect, we've had 3 projects ongoing, the first of which is documenting and assessing metadata in Hyrax. This is partly influenced by the Avalon work that Jen spoke about earlier, really understanding what's currently in there and what's in the generic works. So it says here default fields, but it's really the default fields specifically for the generic work. And then developing comments, talking about how we're all adapting and using them and building them into actionable tickets to see where we can address some legacy issues and where we can perhaps build it into the roadmap going forward. And then next slide. So sorry, I said 3, but we have a 4th, I suppose. We have the Hyrax ordering working group, which is seeking to address the issues of how linked data is inherently unordered, but what one would do when needing to order, say, a list of creators, for example. So that's a very specific task group that has already sent recommendations and report to the product owner. We'll continue to update if we get more on where that's going to end up going. The Mods to RDF working group has completed its work, and there's a draft recommendation which is ready for your review. And finally, as I mentioned previously, we're trying to loop in with where the overall product is going and ask how we as metadata people can either review things that already exist, turn that into documentation for people to use the service, and influence future development. So we have Julie on SIGAR listening, reporting back, and being ready to put our ideas forward. So coming soon will be some tickets and recommendations for what comes next in Hyrax, and then documentation for the Hyrax 2.0 generic work metadata, and ideally that would build into documentation for the 3.0 as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer?
Hey, okay, so I am Jennifer Lindner from Data Curation Experts. The Code Stability Working Group was just kind of a smallish group, and was only we only met for 4 meetings for a short time in order to come up with our guidelines. And so the other members were Chris Colvard from Avalon in Indiana, Valerie Marr, also of Data Curation Experts, and Trey Penjagan of Princeton. And so, you know, basically this group grew out of discussions that had been going on, probably are still going on, just about tensions around our release process and the difficulty that our releases often place on adopters, unexpected breakages, that kind of thing. And so this group met to come up with like a specific guidelines for avoiding for basically, you know, avoiding problems and smoothing out these tensions and making it ultimately a lot easier for adopters. And so, you know, like the document itself, I think is linked in this slide, our recommendations guideline. It's on DuraSpace, but these are the highlights that I wanted to call out from it. You know, number one, just using semantic versioning in a way that the entire community supports and understands, but essentially being able to indicate when you have schema changes versus when you're just doing like minor bug changes. So some way that's meaningful and conveys the impact of, well, conveys the type of changes that are going on in their release. But the other things had more to do with some things were really specific to coders. So for making sure to develop separation of public and private interfaces, but to be really thoughtful about it. And anything that you make public is going to be something that you're going to need to maintain and or change. And so those things should be as well designed as possible. Some of the rest of them had to do with processes. And I was looking at this slide, and I think I'm going to go back to the actual recommendation doc for a second, because ultimately everything we've recommended is based on things that are working out there somewhere. So for example, our spec was our a really good example of a really big upgrade that went very well, and it was based on really, really good deprecation warnings and a specific tactic whereby they made a 2.99 branch. So they went from 2 to 3. The 2.99 branch had all of these deprecation warnings in it, and any adopter at their leisure could go through and, you know, adapt these warnings, adapt their code, and at the end of it, everything worked fine. And this was something that was, you know, our spec is a really, really widely used tool, and this tactic that it worked so well is basically a really shining testimony to the fact that this is a good practice and that it can definitely work. And so there are other things in this document that have to do, you know, like along the lines of development and good practices, you know, like identifying breaking changes, other sort of, you know, like commit messages, again, kind of a developer focused thing, commit messages and pull request summaries that are really, really meaningful. Think about them as you haven't seen your code in 5 years, and so you have no idea what's going on. What was happening at the state of these code changes, and your commit messages should be really, really communicative to the future and to your future self. Some were a little bit more abstract in the sense of a good practice, like for the community in general. We really wanted to stress that it's better to use feature flippers and to avoid long-running branches, because that puts an awful lot of strain on everybody involved. And we wanted to stress that really good quality assurance of our code you know, a really, really good manual testing process. Those things just pay off absolutely in spades. And has been seen, you know, again, like over and over again in varying contexts. And I think that's it. So thank you.
Hey everybody, so this is the marketing working group. The last 2 slides after 3 hours of everybody staring at their computers. Chris is our facilitator and he can't make it here today, unfortunately, because he claims his daughter has an event at the high school or at her school that he had to attend, and we all know that he's really at a bar watching the UK play in the World Cup. Anyway, our regular meeting times are Wednesday at 11:30 Eastern Time. We don't use Slack at the moment, but we can set it up if people want to join the group that are interested. Activities since the last Connect. So the marketing group's role is to get everybody in the world to use and know about Samvera and to push out communications and interest and excitement about what we're doing. The group was established in May of 2018, and we are now currently meeting regularly up into Connect 2019, and at that point we will decide the future of the group beyond that. Next slide. Again, our purpose is to identify how to market and best communicate about Samvera to both people in the community and people outside the community. We are trying to figure out what our key messages are. We're trying to develop a brand, emphasize the benefits of working in a community. How do we reach out to different kinds of audiences? How do we get more people involved? How do we answer questions that we ourselves have and that we ourselves are asked? And create marketing materials for everybody that will be fun and engaging. And not just for people in the community, but also for people outside the community. So if you have ideas for stuff that you think would be a great way to spark interest, please let us know. And please tell us what works for you at other conferences that you go to that that Samvera might be able to utilize. We're looking for feedback at Connect 2019 for comments and what our next steps will be. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, so this is one last chance to ask any questions that you might have. We have about 22 minutes before we end the virtual Connect. Okay. Okay, so there's a question for Karen. Is there any marketing going on specifically to smaller institutions?
We're just now trying to formulate what the plan is going to be for outreach. But if you have some ideas and suggestions, please shoot them our way.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, then we can conclude this. We will hope to see you all in Salt Lake City. Just a reminder again for some of the deadlines. Oops, I see all those say August 15th, but actually it's July 13th for workshop proposal, July 30th for presentation proposal, and August 15th for early bird registration. So I think we can post that in the Slack channel and also in the chat for everyone to see. The early bird registration ends on August 15th. It seems like it's a lot of emphasis on early bird registration, which is 250, and after that it's gonna be 275. So hope you can register early. So I would just want to end by saying thank you to all the featured presenters, lightning talks presenters, and the interest in working group updates, facilitators. It was a lot of good information. I really enjoyed it. I liked it. Hope you all did too. If there are any questions that were not answered here, please feel free to keep chatting in the Slack channel. And we will be sending a survey on Friday. Please take out a few minutes to fill out the survey. This helps us improve the future virtual connects. The recording of this event will be available by hopefully Friday. So there will be a link sent to you all, whoever registered for the event. If you registered as, if you attended as a group, then you might not receive that email. But otherwise it will go out to all the registered participants. And at the end, I want to say one more time, special thanks to the program committee. Without them, this was not possible. And very special thanks to Chrissy for arranging all the Zoom technology. Thank you. See you in Salt Lake City.
And thank you, Nabeela.
Thanks, Tom. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Nabeela. Great job.
Thanks.